So one of the things that I think a lot of professionals go through as we traverse through our careers in this industry is we either find ourselves in a place where we are in charge of making a decision. What help desk software should we put in? Or we might be placed into an environment where they've already made that decision for us, and we just have to live with the help desk software that they've selected. So I'm interested from your perspective, what's been your experience? Which of these software suites tend to work better for you? What are pros and cons of one versus the other? How do you choose?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. I mean, I think that for most companies, and again, I'm not trying to endorse anything here, but I mean, I think for most companies, something like a Zendesk is probably the base, right? I don't think Zendesk, gets it right all the time, but I mean, it's good at what it does. It's fast. It has multiple channels. You can input. There's tons of integrations. It's almost like the Salesforce of that world, right? Mm-hmm. Where I'm not the biggest fan of Salesforce, but because it integrates into everything, it's the default for the sales world. You almost have to go with it because everyone wants to have all their tools kind of brought together, right? So that's the biggest advantage when you say pro and con. I think that's the biggest advantage of something like Zendesk. I would argue that there's no best tool. I think that, again, going back to the theme of this whole chat is around what do your customers need from you, and so depending on the tools, like Intercom, has a pretty decent chat wizard. Or chat interface. I'm not convinced that it's great for all solutions either, but it's got a good chat widget, and if you're going to go that chat route or you have shared support, great. Help Scout has their shared inboxes. Like they all have kind of their feature that I think, depending on the nature of your support, is important to you. But I think as a good base, like if you just have a 2-3 person team or even just a 1-person team, Zendesk is probably a good starter, and then you can figure out at the enterprise level where you want to go. I would say the biggest con of almost all the tools I mentioned, and quite honestly, all the tools I've worked with, is the reporting has just not advanced enough. In fact, I just had a situation this past week when I was working with a client where the system had a default SLA breached metric, and it was like, true or false, is the SLA breached? And the team was being measured on did they satisfy 85+% of SLAs. And when we started digging into it, we realized, well, that really wasn't what we were measuring, right? The system had just kind of defined SLA in a slightly different way. The data was presented in a different way because of the process the team was using. And so it was just this very weird thing where it was like you were being measured on a metric that we actually didn't understand properly. And once we dug into it, once we talked to their support department, and it was like, oh yeah, now we understand the metric. Now we know that we're not measuring what we think we're measuring here. And I know Zendesk just recently redid their entire reporting engine. It's good. It's fine. It does the job for the basics, but honestly, I just run the superset of data I want and always export it to Google Sheets or something, or Excel, and just manipulate it myself, because I am just not convinced the reporting engines of most of these tools are at the space where intelligent business decisions can be made directly from within the tools themselves. So that's probably the biggest con of all of them.
Yeah.
And I would say the other con that you get, that you see quite often, is people trying to implement a process into a tool as opposed to using the benefits of the tool to create their process. So what I mean by that is, if let's say you are switching tool. Let's say you are on Freshdesk and you're going to Zendesk, right? Your process probably will have to change. And I think there's this mindset of, well, no, this is my process, and just your tool should make this process work. It's like, well, you're purchasing the tool for a reason. Presumably one of those reasons is it's more efficient in doing certain things. Why don't you reevaluate your process when you're reevaluating a tool, right? And I saw this with people. I did a consultancy gig for a small company, 2-person support department, and they basically would just they literally had an email address that someone would email, and they would just inside Gmail respond back to the email. There was no tracking, there was no metrics, and they wanted to be a bit more sophisticated. And then they got Zendesk, and they just did exactly that. The ticket would come in, and they respond to it, and so they had hundreds of open tickets because they weren't caring about statuses, they weren't caring about all the metadata. Like, they still couldn't report on it. They just had a different. They went to a different UI to answer their tickets.
Wow.
And I said, like, if you move to a new tool, you need to make your processes make that tool work, right? Like, so your processes should adapt to the tool's methodology, whatever that tool is, versus adapting versus the opposite of that, of trying to bring your process into a tool that may not be suited for that person.